Welcome to another edition of the Sports Philosophy, your guide to the National Philosophers Athletic League. I'm Chip Cummings.
And I'm Dick Stevens. We have an interesting show today. As you know, we've been looking at some of the greatest stars of sports for the last few weeks.
That's right, Dick. And today we are going to take a look at Socrates, one of the most controversial players in the league.
Socrates plays like no one else.
Let's look at the game from last season.
I think this is a perfect game to look at. It's a one-on-one match against a player from Athens named Euthyphro.
Euthyphro is asked to tell Socrates what piety is.
Piety can be seen in justice. Impiety can be seen in crime.
Euthyphro's first instinct is to define piety with examples.
But this won't satisfy Socrates, who wants to understand what qualities make something pious.
That way, piety can be immediately recognized in the future.
Socrates stops Euthyphro from attempting to do this by asking him to specifically define piety.
Piety is what is loved by the gods.
Something appears to be wrong with your answer. Do you consider yourself to be an expert on the gods?
Yes.
Isn't it true that sometimes they disagree?
Yes.
Then something could be loved by one god and hated by another.
Yes.
So the same thing might be pious to one god and impious to another.
I guess.
What if we change your original definition to, what all gods love is pious, and what they disagree on may or may not be pious?
Yes, what all gods love is pious.
By making Euthyphro put the definitions into his own words, Socrates let Euthyphro continue to believe he is in control.
Right, this is a classic Socratic move. We see him do this all the time.
Is that which loves distinct from which is loved?
Yes.
So is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or do the gods make it pious by loving it?
The gods love it because it is pious.
So piety cannot be what you say it is, Euthyphro.
How do you mean?
If the pious is loved by the gods because it is pious, then it cannot be defined by the gods' love for it. We want to examine what makes the gods love it.
I really do not know how to express what I mean. You keep manipulating my words.
I've said very little, Euthyphro. You have agreed with me at each turn.
I love this about Socrates' game. He stops his opponents from scoring by using the words against them.
Other players have criticized Socrates for manipulating their words or making them walk in circles.
But we can see what they mean. Over the course of the game with Euthyphro, Euthyphro ends up explaining that piety is what is loved by the gods numerous times.
Right, it is like the game keeps moving back to where it was when it started.
Of course, this makes us wonder what Socrates is trying to do.
Right, unlike sophists who manipulate their opponent's words to win arguments, Socrates never attempts to make any baskets of his own.
Winning isn't Socrates' goal. All he seems to do is to prevent his opponent from scoring.
This game against Euthyphro just keeps on going without Euthyphro ever getting closer to defining piety.
To better understand Socrates' game strategy, we have Plato. For those of you that don't know, Plato is a former head coach for the Academy and the philosophical columnist. He is considered to be the leading expert for Socrates' strategy. Thank you for joining us, Plato.
Thanks for having me, Chip.
Dick and I were just discussing what we think Socrates is actually trying to accomplish. Any ideas?
Well, Socrates plays an excellent defensive game, but his offensive game is non-existent. While he has never made it clear what he is trying to do, many believe he doesn't want to have an offensive game.
What do you mean by that?
Socrates' opponents are generally cocky. They think they know what they're doing. Some believe that Socrates is simply trying to show them that they do not.
So he's not actually trying to help them score. Sometimes that's the way it seems.
No, he's trying to show them that they can't score, no matter how right they think they are.
I have to ask, why bother if they can't ever know anything?
Well, I believe Socrates wants them to keep looking. The search for understanding is more important than arriving at one's goal.
Thank you, Plato. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Chip. The pleasure was all mine.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's really atypical for a player to work so hard to challenge other players without trying to win.
Next, we're going to talk to Socrates himself to find out his take on his game. Socrates, welcome.
I'm happy to be here, Dick.
Chip and I were just talking about how strange it is that you never try to win your games.
There would really be no point. Any knowledge I'd gain from my opponent or give myself is worthless in the grand scheme of things.
Is there any way you could win a game?
Well, I was batting around this idea about forms for a while.
Why don't you tell me about it?
Sure, Dick. Let's imagine a game where the goal is to define justice. My opponents think they know what justice is, but their ideas are vague and cannot be applied universally. This is not what I want to go after. What if on some higher plane there is a perfect form of the idea of justice? It is easy to find examples of justice in the world, but they are only inferior reflections of the one form of justice. If this form could be seen, then one could understand justice universally.
So if you could see the form of justice, then you could apply it to everything and know you were acting justly.
That is correct, Dick.
Why haven't you continued your search for these forms?
There are some problems with my theory.
Like what?
The first problem is one of participation, meaning how the particular examples of a form relate to it. I have no idea how they do. The second rises from the question, is the form of justice just? If it is in fact just, then it, like all examples of justice, must have a form above it somewhere. Each form would have to have another form behind it, and we would end up with infinite forms of justice.
I could see how your theory could be impractical.
Yes, in the end I would be no closer to understanding the universal idea of justice.
So what would be the point of looking in the first place if you can never know it?
Well, Dick, I've always thought that the unexamined life is not worth living.
Thank you, Socrates. I appreciate you coming down to give us that perspective.
Anytime, Dick.
Well, that was interesting, Dick.
Yes, but frustrating. It seems that we can never really know anything except that we don't know.
Well, that's all the time we have today on sports philosophy.
Tune in next week when we'll take a look at Rene Descartes' career in baseball.
Thanks for watching.